There we go. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. This is Cheryl Arkison coming to you from my basement in Calgary, Alberta. We are here in the first of two wrap-ups for the Quilters Playcation Adventure Sewalong. I am recording this so that everybody can have access to it. It's having the 2 hour on live is a bit much, and this will allow people to share what they're doing, which we can't do as easily on live. So a little bit of a different format for us, but also works. And then this will live, hopefully, if the recording works, online in perpetuity for people to refer to. So we are here at the end of 52 weeks, the whole of 2022. We gathered once a week, or let me rephrase that. You gathered with me, you came along for the ride to make one block a week, one simple, straightforward, well, sometimes they weren't so simple, straightforward blocks for the Adventure Sewalong in there. I have made 2.5 versions of it. I'm not quite finished the third version, but I've been plugging away at it. But those of you who've been on the lives, you have seen this version. I picked with just 3 different solid fabrics. I started, it turns out I used 2 different weights, but whatever. All of the blocks that we did in the solid version. And then there is the print version as well. Oops, I just dropped extra fabric. Not blocks, doesn't matter. We'll just kick that out of the way. And then I did these print versions along the way as well, just to show that, you know, I think there's this perception that a lot of modern quilts and improv work has to come with the solids, but that prints can work really, really well, and you can use them to your advantage. So I did the 2, and then I have another set of blocks, which are kind of like my own personal play of just solids, random colored solids. I'm just kind of grabbing as I go with all of those, and I'll grab them later. So we have 52 blocks, or however many you made. You didn't have to make them all. There's someone wanting to join. We have the 52 blocks all made. I'm going to assume you have 52, but use however many you have. And we're going to put them, we need to get them into a quilt top now. And there are so many different ways to do that. And I'm really excited to share with you a bunch of ideas that I have for it. Now, there are a couple of different ways to approach getting them onto a quilt top. And it kind of boils down to sort of a handful of options, but with variations in there. So the very first option is throw them up. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody except for me. There we go. Sorry, let me rephrase it. If you have questions, please unmute yourself and interrupt. Happy to have that. Or you can put it in the chat. We will have that there, and then I'll read them from the chat. I should have said that. And any other housekeeping, you're at home, take your breaks, do whatever, stay as long as you want. This is obviously longer than our usual kind of half an hour on Instagram Live, just because I want to show you a bunch of different things. So back to our options. The very first simple option is to square up all of your blocks to exactly the same size and do a straight grid, right? And just have the blocks. Now we have 52 blocks. 52 doesn't divide into a nice square or rectangle easily, right? 49 blocks would have a 7 by 7. 7 by 8 is 56 in there. 50, you could go 5 by 10, whatever you want. Don't worry about that. I'm going to give you a couple of ideas on how to fill the gaps. Or if you just want 7 by 7, you know, maybe you have 3 blocks that are outliers or don't work as well, or you don't like them, or you missed them. You didn't get all 52 done. Then you can go 7 by 7. You can divide it into smaller groups and make, you know, multiple smaller quilts. I have seen some of those already in there. So you have kind of options in there, but the basic is squaring them all up to the same size with that. Now, variations on this is you could square them all up to the same width and make columns. So you have less of a grid, but you're making columns, or you square them all up to the same height and you make rows, but they don't necessarily line up in a straight grid. Another thing you can do when you have things squared up to the same size is you can have sashing added to things. So you can have sashing in between each block and in between each row, a very kind of traditional sort of layout. I think I'm going to do that with one of mine actually. And then you get to play with what that sashing looks like. Is the sashing going to be a contrasting color? Is it going to be one of the same fabrics that you've done? Is it going to really kind of stand out? How big, how wide, how skinny, how wide the sashing is? All of those are design decisions too, and I'm going to show you how to play with them. So that's kind of one, right? We're going to square up to consistent sizes and play with different layouts that way. The other way to do it, and so that idea is what I'm going to do with my prints. So we're going to talk about the way to manage all of that and to kind of come up with some ideas and for what you might want to do. So that's the easy way. We'll save the easy way for the last part. The other way to do it is to kind of do what I refer to as a come what may kind of idea, that all of my blocks are different sizes. Very different sizes. And so I'm just going to use them as they are, and I'm going to puzzle it together as they come to me. So for example, right, I have this block, and then I'm just going to pull, say, my house. They're not at all the same size. Right? If I were going the route of squaring everything up to the same size, this might cause me concern. I might make some changes. We'll talk about that as well. But I don't care, because I'm going to have fun kind of lining things up and putting filler strips in and everything like that. So those are sort of the two kind of main ways we can do it, with variations in all of that in there. So I'm going to do the opposite of what I just said. I'm going to go with the easy one first. Just start with basic, straightforward kind of stuff. Just throw that over there. So I'm going to go back to my print ones here. Got some extra fabric there. So I've got my print ones. They're actually coming up in they're coming up in no order. Well, maybe there we go. I think this one was supposed to be at the end. Yes, there's my thank you ones, all at the end. Okay, so we have all of these. What I noticed as the year went on is that I got bigger and bigger with my blocks in there. So before I go ahead, and remember at the very beginning, I said, don't square these things up yet, because you don't know what you want to do. This is where we're going to start making some of those decisions now. So what I want to do is I want to take a selection of these blocks and measure them, see where they're at, because I'm going to let the blocks tell me what size they want to be squared up to. And so I will take probably half of these maybe and do a quick measurement. So let's switch cameras and I'm going to show you that process. It's always worth to take a little bit of time in planning to do this. So let's set my other camera up here. There we go. Okay, let me switch cameras for you so that you can see that. There we go. There I am. Oh, let's say hi to the ladies. There they are. Hello, ladies. And then otherwise, we're at the table here. Okay. Got my sewing machine on. I'm just actually going to turn it off because it hums. So what you want to do, have handy, is you don't need your scissors and your rotary cutter yet, but you do need rulers. And I like to keep a couple of sizes close by. I have 2 square rulers. Ow, and I just cut myself on my ruler. I must have something sticking out somewhere. That was awesome. Ooh, I think I just got a piece of metal. Sorry. There, I think I got it out. It's like a little sliver or something. No, I did not get it out. All right, well, I'll deal with that later, but so that I don't bleed on things, I'm just going to grab if you're ever in the sewing room and you cut yourself and you don't want to go upstairs for the Band-Aid, I just take a scrap of fabric and use that. So that is what I'm going to do. So don't bleed on my blocks. I don't want to do that. There we go. That's improv right there. Okay, so I have 2 square rulers. I have a 12 and a half. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here for you. I've got a 12 and a half, and then this one is a 16 and a half. These just happen to be the 2 big squares that I have here. And then I'm going to take my blocks and I'm just going to start, getting an eyeball measurement of them. I know my first ones are smaller. Just kept getting bigger and bigger. So I want to see, right? I've got about 10 and a half-ish, sort of, I could get a 10 and a half inch square. And then I'm going to start making piles, right? I could get 10 and a half out of that. Right, this one, not quite, still 10 and a half. So I'm going to make piles based on what the biggest amount I can is, right? There, I can do 12 and a half. So that's a separate pile. And all that. I'll actually just put that pile on top of my sewing machine. So I'll just go through all of my blocks and see. How am I going to determine what size I want to make these? What I will likely do is wherever the majority of them land, I will make them that size. That's my approach. See, this one is even smaller. That's going to be a little bit of an outlier. Wherever the majority of them land is where I tend to want to do it, unless I have some kind of a specific notion in mind with it. Now, let's say I'm just going to go through, I'll measure just a couple of more because I've got kind of varying sizes in these first ones here. So that one, there's another smaller than 10 and a half inches. Let's say I go through and I've measured all of these. Now I know as I've gone through, right, you can see from the rest of my blocks, I started getting big with a lot of them, right? My house block here is enormous. Some of these are quite large. Well, maybe not that one, but I have some larger ones. Let's say, or as the expression I often use, shits and giggles, pardon my language. Let's say that the majority of them I can cut to 12 and a half inches, but I have these ones that are smaller. What am I going to do? What do I want to do with all of these? This is your opportunity to just make these blocks a little bit bigger. It's not a big deal. We've been doing improv work. It's not that great of a big deal to do make some changes along the way. So for example, these ones, this is pretty straightforward. I can add another strip. And I can add it in this case of any fabric, right? If I have more of this green, which maybe I do, I don't think I do, but I could add another green, right? I could add a strip of one of my other greens. I could add a strip of my feature peach, anything that gets me that little bit bigger. We're doing improv, so it's about kind of finding a quick solution. that would get that one bigger. This one, I've got my heart, right? I could add a strip of green just on two sides. I could add it all the way around because I know I don't have any more of this fabric. I could take my peach and add it all the way around. I don't have any more of the gray, so I can't add that. So I can just add it, right? As opposed to cutting all of these bigger blocks down to the smaller size. If I only have a few blocks that are smaller than the size that I want, I'm going to add to get them up to size. Does that make sense to everybody? Is that making sense? So I think that's what I'm going to do, because I think if I look at a lot of my blocks, I'll just measure a few more. I mean, I think I can get, well, that one's even, oh no, I can get 10.5 there, but I know a lot of my later blocks are bigger. Well, maybe I am just getting, might just go to 10.5 for everything, right? And then we have these big blocks, right? That could be 12.5 inches, but I'm just going to cut it down to 10.5. Right? So we have kind of those options. Now, what if we have a block that if we cut it down, it's going to lose the design effect? So we have a couple blocks like that where we might have some variations if we cut it down too much. I think our Golden Gate one can handle being cut down. The hearth, you may end up with very skinny bits on the sides. That'll be okay. Most of them should be fine. This one, I can already tell, is one of the smaller ones. Same with this one. The other option when you have blocks like this is you can add more, right? I can add some more of this little kind of checkerboard kind of idea that we did to make it bigger, or I can just put a border around the block. But I want to get to, you know, maybe you have this and it's going to be too, you're going to cut off too much. Let's see what happens when I put that under the ruler. Right, this is a great one. This one could actually be the larger size, but if I go to make it smaller, I'm still going to have the idea of the design, so I'll be okay with that. But the one I'm thinking of, for example, that's going to change things might be my house. Right, my house is quite large. Right, if I cut this down to 10.5 inches, you know, I'm losing half my house in there, which is going to be kind of annoying, isn't it? Right, to suddenly have only half the house. So I have an idea for blocks like this that end up being the larger outliers, and that is to make them count as 2 blocks. So if you're just doing a straight grid, let's say I'm doing straight grid 10.5 inches, what I would want is I would want this block to be that same height, 10.5 inches, which I have more than enough to go around. And then I would make it twice as big, so 20.5 inches, right? Because a finished block is going to be 10 inches plus our 1/2 inch seam allowance. So that becomes 20.5 inches. So how big am I on this? Let me get a long ruler to measure that. Oh my goodness. Look at that. I wouldn't have to add anything. Can't believe that. Quite surprised. I was fully expecting it, but I'm right at 20.5 inches there. But if you have to add to the side, just add a little bit on the side or add a little bit on the top. And then this becomes 2 blocks. So now in your layout of say 56 blocks, you have 53. Does that make sense to everybody? Understanding that? Happy? I'm not bleeding much, so that's good. So that's how I'm going to manage all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and decide right now, I'm making these 10.5 inch blocks. Right, and if you want to do the math real quick, I'll do it for you, so you don't have to. So we have 52 blocks, which to get, I'm gonna zoom in on the map here, 52 blocks, I'm actually going to make that 56 because that gives me a 7x8 layout, right? So if we're imagining a quilt, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll just do to draw my original one big enough. Right, so I'm going to have a 7x8 layout. I know, for example, that my house block, I'm going to put her right there. Let's just erase that little bit. Right, really, that's what I'm getting at because I'm going to have that one bigger one. Now, in my case, so that means I have 50. We'll go there. Now, because we only have 52, you have the choice. You can make additional blocks, or you can just put one of your fabrics in the corners, right? Fill up those corners or fill up a space anywhere that you need to. They don't have to be in the corners. That's just easy. That's going to get you kind of along the way. So if I'm squaring up my blocks to 10.5 inches by 10.5 inches, how big does that make my quilt? Well, we don't use the seam allowances in there. That's going to make me, if we're 7x8, so 7 times 10 is 70 inches. 8 times 10 equals 80 inches. I'm going to have a 70 by 80 inch quilt when all is said and done, which is pretty much enough to fit a double bed, right? I kind of use 80 by 80 as my marker for a double bed or a very generous lap size. Let me do some more math for you. Let's say you make 9.5 inch blocks and go with this layout. How big are you going to get? Well, you're going to go 7 times 9 is 63. And then 8 times 9 is 72, right? So you're going to have a 63 by 72 inch quilt. If you go 12 inch blocks, how big are you going to get? And the reason I'm doing this math is because when the reality hits of how big these quilts could be, you may not want your quilt that big. You may want to make it smaller. So you may want to square your blocks up smaller or split them into smaller groups, for example, right? If half of your blocks are one size and half are another, well, then that's kind of going to give you a way to do that. So 12 times 7 is 84. And 12 times 8 is 96. So if you do 12.5 inch blocks, you're going to have an 84 by 96 inch quilt, right? So that's a big sucker. That's going to be awesome in there. Now, what if you add sashing to all of these? You're going to have to add however much of sashing that width you do is, whether it's 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, all of that is going to be added to these numbers. So things to keep in mind when you're deciding how big you're going to square up your blocks. For now, I'm going to go with this and go with 10.5 inches. I may add sashing. I'm not sure. I'm going to square up a bunch of blocks and then go to the design wall and see what I feel like doing. And I'll show you that process. So any questions on the math there? Making sense? I see Connie put quilting can be dangerous. It can, Connie. I have cut off part of my finger once, back when I was a beginner quilter. Okay, let's go to block number 1 and let's talk squaring up. I really think it's important to take the time to do this step well. So as much as we've been doing improv, and as much as improv has that reputation of being wonky along the way, you've heard me say on all of the lives that there are things we need to do to still ensure good sewing. And that is that we are going to press. We're using a consistent seam allowance. That's the first one. We're going to press as we go, and then we are going to square up. And all of these things are important for getting a quilt that not only will lay flat or flat-ish, it will, oh, I just screwed up my arm. Nope, I thought I did. Flat-ish, but stay together, right? We want quality work and we want it to stay together. Wonky does and improv does not mean throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So before I square up a block, I like to have it nice, fresh press, so it's as flat as it can be. And then I'm going to put the ruler on it. Now I'm going to demonstrate, I am right-handed, so I will demonstrate this block right-handed, and then I will show you left-handed on the next block. I won't cut left-handed because that's a recipe to hurt myself. So I always like to use the smallest ruler relevantly possible. So I have this 12.5-inch ruler. I don't like a lot of extra rulers in my stash just because it's pain. I don't have room. But I'm not going to take this big ruler because then there's all this stuff I'm not using that I have to manage, right? I don't want to have to manage this much. So if you have a smaller ruler that works for what you're doing, go for it. But let's say you only have a 12.5-inch ruler and you're making 6.5-inch blocks, then that's what you've got. Don't go out and buy anything new to do this. So then I'm going to put my ruler on my piece and I'm going to see where does it fit in all of this. I want to maximize, so I know I want 10.5 inches. So I know where my 10.5-inch marks, and I'm going to place this on the block and play with it to get it where I want to go. If you are, I'm just going to zoom in here. If you are, because I'm just going to move it over to show you, like a little bit out. So this is my 10.5-inch mark there, and I'm a little bit out right now, just because I've shifted the ruler over to show this. I'm almost 1/4 inch out, then I don't want to cut this at 10.5 inches. I want to cut this at 10.25 inches, and then I will cut all the rest of mine at 10.25. But I have room. If I'm only out by 1/8 inch or so, I will just cut that and have that be a little bit small because that's going to get managed in my seam allowance. If you're cutting and you have one that's a little bit out and it seems to be an outlier, put it aside, measure more blocks and see. It may be that you need to cut them all to 10.25 inch as opposed to 10.5 or 9.75 inches. It doesn't really matter what that number is as long as they're the consistency along the way. So I'm good. I'm happy here. I'm going to be a little bit out on this particular one. That's fine. So right-handed, got my rotary cutter, it's locked for me. So I'm unlocked now and I have my hand. I like to do what I call the hang loose way of holding the ruler. So hang loose, let's hide that because it's distracting. I want my pinky off the ruler and my thumb off the ruler. See, if I'd used that big ruler, I wouldn't have been able to do that because there's so much here and then I'd be holding the ruler far away from here. So I like to have the pinky and thumb off because then the ruler can't slide. Maybe you have one of those grip things, that's fine. You're not going to be able to do the pinky and the thumb, but it might be worth trying. And then I take my fingers out from that hang loose thing and I hold them. And that is what I'm pushing. I'm not pushing down with my pinky and my thumb. They're holding the ruler in place, but I'm pushing down to hold the ruler in place with my other fingers. And then I'm going to go, I'll double check everywhere, feeling good. And I'm going to go from the bottom up on the right side, and then from the right to the left. Now, before I move the ruler, I like to take my finger and move the fabric that I just cut. And that way I'll know that it cut the whole way through before I do it. And now I have a nice fresh cut there. Then I'm going to take that and I'm going to rotate that block so that my fresh cut is going to be down here on my 10.5-inch mark. So I will line up my nice straight cut on the 10.5-inch there and the 10.5-inch there, and know that I'm going to cut this. Hang 10, hang loose, whatever, again, and then hold it in place. Cut from the bottom up and the right to the left. Double check that everything moves. If you were finding it's not moving, you can run over it twice or change your blade. We all wait too long to change our blade, but if you're going to have to square up a whole bunch of blocks, change your blade. You'll be much happier. And then we have a nice, clean 10.5-inch block. Make sense? Oops. There we go. Does that make sense to everybody? That's the right-handed way. Let's do a lefty way. I will grab another block. So the lining up process is the same after we give this a good press, right? Make sure your seam allowances are going where you want them to be. The block is as flat as can be. If you're like me, you've handled these blocks a lot, things might have moved around. Just give her a fresh press along the way. Okay. So I have a nice fresh press there. So if you're left-handed, the process is the same, just with the left hand, but it's also where you're going to line it up. Because we are cutting on the left side first, I need to make sure I'm going to give this is my first cut, and then I've got to make sure I'm where I want to be on this side along the way. Do it this way. There we go. So if you have your ruler, right, for us right-handed people, we went 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, because we were measuring this way. For lefties, you're going to have that in the top left corner so that you can have the bottom be where you want on the 10.5-inch mark, and then this side, and then this is your fresh cut. So I'm going to go there and move that up a little bit. Now for our left-handed people, I'm not going to cut because I will hurt myself this way. Hang loose with the right hand. You're going to hold the ruler with your pinky and thumb there. Hold it in place and then hold the ruler down. And then you're going to cut from the bottom to the top on the left side, and then from the left to the right along the top. You'll remove your fabric, make sure that it's cut, and then you're going to rotate your block so that your fresh cut is in the bottom right-hand corner. And you'll be able to line up the 10.5-inch mark here and the 10.5-inch mark there and repeat the process. Go up and then left to right. This really is worth every ounce of effort to be steady with this entire process along the way. Now I want to show you one little tip, provided I have in here some washi tape, unless my kids have taken it all. All right, well, I'll just do it with the dry erase for now because the kids have taken all my washi tape. Actually, it might be here. Pardon me, I'll use some masking tape because I can't find it. If you're using a ruler that is not the size of the block that you're doing, you're squaring up. So I'm using a 12.5-inch ruler, but I have a 10.5-inch block. You can take some tape This is why I like washi tape, just because I'll just use a little piece, but you could put your line all the way. I'm just going to show you right on that 10.5-inch line. Right, so you don't have to be paying attention to anything else. You're not getting confused. Right, we have it along the way there. Right, and then you could do it again, the same all the way there. So now when I go to square up my blocks, right, it's pretty easy. As long as I know I'm within this line, I'm okay. I don't like to cover things up entirely like this because I want to see. So the alternative is this. I'm just going to take bits from this tape. I will just mark the intersection of my 10.5-inch line so that I can still see most of what I'm doing. This is why I like washi tape, because it's thinner, but just visible enough. Right, so I'm just marking the corner as opposed to the whole line, but go with what works for you. Is that making sense to everybody? Feeling good about that? So let me go ahead. I'm going to square up a few more of these blocks just to get us to a good point so that I can go on the design wall. So bottom to top, right to left or left to right. Move the pieces. Now, see, I've taken these pieces off. Oh boy, more scraps. That's all right. Maybe if I have smaller blocks that need to be filled in, I can use those scraps. Or I can put them on the back. So now, see, I have my tape. My tape marks that corner quite nicely. Right, so I can just go from there. Right, you might have these funky pieced bits. But this is the moment. I don't want to just, I'm going to go ahead and say what's functional out of this scrap to try to manage things. This piece, not so functional. It can go in there. I'll say that blue and this little peach. And these I'm just going to throw in the trash. So I like to kind of manage things as I go that way. Let me square up a few more. Right, this one's quite large. I have, right, I could get a 12.5-inch block, but I only want 10.5 inches. So now I have choices on where I put the ruler when I square up. I can also make it wonky, right? I can turn my ruler to an angle when I go to square this up and have some fun with that, which, you know what, I think I'm going to do. So let's see, 10.5, 10.5, 10.5. Let's go for it. Why not? Why not? Same process. Big scraps. Already you can kind of see how that changed the dynamic of the block a little bit. Get my corner going down there. Oops. 10.5, 10.5. Perfect. Oops, I went a little off there. Okay. You'll see I can go off a little wide, but because I'm holding my ruler, it's not slipping on me. So there's that, you know, that block. That's a little bit different with that angle. Why not? Why not there? Let's go to a couple more here. I just want to get a few to play with. Again, I can play with the angle on this one. Or if you have kind of unique features, and I want to make sure, because this block could be 12.5 inches. If I cut it up this way, and then this is where my corner is, I'm losing a lot of that little interesting green bit. So I'm going to pull this down as much as possible so that I have as much of that green bit in there, and I'm going to end up cutting off quite a bit. Oops, I'm not quite there. See my corner, I was like, oh look, my corner is good, but I was well below the 10 over here. So I'm just gonna move that up. It's that old adage, measure twice, cut once, always double check. But you know what, if you make a mistake, you've got all these extra pieces, you can just make the block bigger again. Mistakes will happen. It's not the end of the world at all. We're improvising, right? So we can figure out a solution along the way. There we go. So see, I kept as much of that little green as I could. All right, let me do 2 more quickly. Let's see where we're at. Okay, this one again, I could go a little bit wonky. I'm gonna go just a little bit wonky. Just a wee bit. Now, things to consider. Again, if I go to 10.5 inches here, I'm actually ending that right on the seam allowance of my circle. So one, when it gets sewn to another block, I no longer have this kind of bottom edge of the circle. It will be cut off, but also I'm going to have a lot of bulk because of that seam allowance. So you want to kind of move things so that whenever you have little bits of seam allowance towards the edge, you have more than 1/4 inch. So you're managing your bulk a little bit. So there we go. I'm happy with that. Right. We can make decisions in squaring up that will make assembly and design a little bit easier for us. All right, we're getting there. Let's do, those are the small ones. Let's do just a couple more, some of these later ones with different variations on our color. I'll do these 3 and then we'll head to the design wall and play there. This one's kind of got bunched up, so I do want to give them a little press. Right, love the churn dash ones. And there again, real straightforward here. Now I got points. And when I go to square this up, the way I have the ruler now, I'm actually going to cut off those points. If you don't care, you don't care. It's not a big deal. No matter where I put the ruler on mine, I will cut off points. So I'm just going to basically throw the ruler on and go from there. Now, the other thing you can do, the reason I kind of chose there, is you also have a choice when you have these strips of trimming off enough so that you have what I call functional scraps, right? The way I chose to square up this one, all the pieces that I am cutting off aren't really super functional. They're really skinny and probably can't be used there, right? When we have these really skinny bits, they can't be used again, right? So I might have been better off making a choice to move it so that I have a more functional scrap. This one might be a bit iffy on the size. Oh, just I can get it. Perfect. You know, in a perfect world, that's what you do, but it's improv. It never is a perfect world. Not at all. So I just want to show you over here on the corner. You see how I'm up just a little bit? It's not going to be a perfectly straight corner. I'm within that sort of 1/8 of an inch there, so I'm okay with that. That's a little fudge that's just fine to have. Whoop! Sorry about that. Tripods acting funny. Okay, that's a functional scrap. There we go. We've got that one. Now this is one I'll show you that sort of functional. Oh, that needs a press. Definitely needs a press. I find the blocks that have the curves in them definitely want to be repressed before you cut. Because it might not be kind of laying as flat as you would normally like, but that's okay. So there is that block. Let's go ahead, make sure I can do 10.5. Okay, so here's what I mean by making functional scraps. I've got kind of wiggle room on where I cut this, right? I'm kind of thinking because I have a point here and a point here, I want to maintain those points in this case. So I'm going to move my ruler. I want it to be further up here, and that's going to leave me quite a bit at the bottom that I'm going to cut off. If I didn't care so much about the points and I just kind of slap my ruler on here, there's a couple of things that I'd want to consider. What I cut off here at the bottom, I'm going to have about at least an inch for the most part on the strip. So that's a functional scrap. And this part is a functional scrap too. But let's say I did it kind of like that. And this little bit is not functional, but on the bottom, I'm more functional. Same with side to side. Where do I want it? If I have options, I will always err first from a design perspective. So wanting to maintain my points in this case, and from a what's going to give me a functional scrap perspective. So I want to keep these points. So I want to kind of have that more than a 1/2 inch there. And then it means I'm going to be down here. But I also want to see where am I going to be over here? Because see, I have that seam there, and it's going to end up getting quite bulky in there. But I might have the same issue there. So I'm just going to kind of shift things, just play around with it a little bit, and then get to the point where you're happy and make your cuts. So there we go. Nice fresh cuts there. And then line up on the bottom. And then we're going to go to the design wall so I can just show you a few things, because as much as I can chit chat forever, you want to talk about layouts, right? So now I have, that was quite a functional scrap that I cut off. So I can put that there. This one's kind of, it's skinny on this end, but thick on that, but we'll stick it in that pile and see what happens. So that's how that block changed, right? I was quite tall and now I'm not on there. So let's flip back to the design wall. Hello. I'm going to turn on my light because even though the sun, oops, not that one. Even though the sun is shining, I want you to be able to see. We'll move this one out of the way for the moment. And make sure she stays charged. Whoops. Okay, I'll take my toque blocks off. I got a couple of toque blocks. Today's the deadline if you're participating in that swap to have them in the mail. So if you could do that. So I'm going to have 1, 2, well, that's my big one. There we go. 3, 4, 5, 6. Sure, we'll start with 6 blocks on the design wall. And I'm actually going to move you a bit closer here. That got angry at me. That's okay. Okay, hi. I don't need my glasses for the design wall. So depending on your blocks, when it comes to the design wall, there's a couple of options when we want to go and lay it out. We can do it, which I actually think could be quite interesting, in order. Right? So we can put it in the order that we made the blocks. Let's pretend these are in order. I know they're not. right? And we can just kind of go week 1 all the way across. But maybe you changed your fabric, or you can see, let's say, in my case, that's going to create, you know, a row of all lights. And then I'm going to move to all darks, and I don't want that, right? So if you're not tied to an in order layout, we kind of have some interesting design possibilities here. So if you're not going, you can say have a whole row of, you know, a light background and then a whole row of a dark background, or if you did different colors like blue, green, red, whatever works, that way you can play around. I can do things like this, right, where I'm getting some color order, you know, create kind of a light dark checkerboard effect with my blocks. I might go through, and once they've all been squared up, or even before I square up, kind of count, like how many do I have that are really dark background? How many that I have are a light background? And play with that and see, did I make them kind of even? I didn't plan any of that as I was going, and you probably didn't too. So here's a few more. For example, I forgot I had squared up these ones too. Right. Other things that you can do is you can organize by theme, right? So if we have blocks with recognizable shapes, right, like our arrows, our X's, even these circles, you can group them together and have more the abstract things going around. So you have kind of choices, whether it's going by shape, whether it's by going color or value or certain fabrics, to help you play with the layout. Another thing that you can do, and we're going to get to this more when we talk about the solid version that I've done, is start thinking about the interactions between the blocks, right? How do they reference each other in there? So for example, right, I have this arrow with this blue background, and I have a lot of that same blue in this block, and I can be creating a line that moves across. Where else do I have this blue fabric? I have this blue fabric in our initial block, right? And so I've now created kind of a relationship with all of this. I have this one that has the blue there. What if I do that? Right? And I'm creating a relationship now with the blue extending there. Suddenly these don't necessarily look like specific blocks, do they? Right? I have this fabric that has that gray, which is in the corner of this block. So I can create a relationship there if I want. What else can I do? Right? This dark gray coming down here is the same as the background on this. So maybe I put those together because I have that relationship coming down there, right? I don't like that gray block in with all of that, but see, now I have all of this peach, and I have this big square, you know, I can play around. Now I'm going to have that peach coming, and that becomes a different kind of relationship. I have this, the gray and the peach in this X. But there's no way, well, I can kind of make the peaches touch there, right? And then now I have these dark ones coming together. So there's different ways to kind of play with all of that. And when they're all cut the same size, it's really easy because you can just be moving blocks around, having fun with it along the way in there. I'm going to go back to this idea. And we're going to talk now about sashing. Just so you guys can see what could happen. Yeah, we'll keep that one there. See, this one doesn't really have a dark, it has kind of, it's a lighter. We'll put that one like that. Right, so we can play around with it there. What if you want to do sashing? How do you determine what sashing to use? It's a whole other design debate for yourself. So first and foremost, what fabric do you have? You don't have to go shopping for this. So do I have, for example, the peach fabric was my main one, right? That I wanted to do with it. I probably have enough to do a skinny sashing on all of these. I can take trimmings and make kind of a random, you know, bit of sashing where I have some of these extra little bits in there, or I can go and choose a completely different color, which is my inclination with this particular one. I could go very light, although I do have, you know, light blocks in here, but I could go with a white, for example. Well, we can just show what a white looks like with the design wall, right? We just kind of pop the blocks apart and suddenly it has a bit of a different effect, right? When we suddenly add a sashing to it. Now the blocks really kind of stand on their own. And even if you do things like this, where we're having the relationships between the colors, it can be really quite interesting to have the sashing change that up a little bit. So you still lay it out like it has the relationships, but the sashing creates kind of a barrier in between. And so it's like a broken, not broken in a bad way, but like a split design in there. So that gives you an idea of what it might look like with sashing on all of that. I'm just gonna, oh, I lost my little fabric thing. There's definitely a sliver in my hand. I'm going to just square up one more block just so I have 9 to work with. Let's go with one that has, I'll do my toque. Just so that I can show you, sorry. It's good to have 9 in there. The toque is going to be a little bit tight. That's okay. Really was just looking for one with that lighter background, and the toque was what I grabbed. So isn't that funny? Okay. 10.5, 10.5. Okay, so now I have another block to play with here with my sashing. And I do really quite like the idea of sashing, and I'm going to do that on my solid one. I'm not sure I'm going to do it here, but let's play with it. Let's pretend I am. What colors could I play with? If you really want the blocks to stand out and the sashing to recede, you're going to pick a neutral color. So in my case, I would pick a white. Probably because I have a lot of this pale gray, and even the other really light fabric I have has kind of a green tone to it. So I might pick a much lighter sort of color, because if I went black or dark gray, the sashing is going to get lost with these blocks, right? We're not really going to see it. But I'm kind of intrigued with the idea of playing with a very contrasting sashing. I love a contrasting binding. I love a contrasting backing, like putting a completely different color on the back that has no relationship to the front, I think is really fun. Same with on the binding. So I'm going to play with that here. And you know what color I'm actually thinking of is a bit of a red, because I think peach and red is a really lovely combination. And red and blue would work, red and green would work, red and the grays would work. So I'm going to go and I'm going to pull my pink bin and my red bin because they're in the same family. And let's play around with what we might be able to do color-wise. So for those of you who don't know, in my sewing room here, I'm just going to turn this so you can see. This is my stash closet box away. I'm very lucky to have this room. But now here you get to a peek inside my stash. All my big cuts. These are my own fabrics. And then I have all of this. So my red bin is actually a little bit empty because the Scandi Village blocks. I've got some reds in there. And my pink bin is here. Actually, the Scandi Village fabrics are there, so I could grab them too. Oh, did I grab pink? No, I thought I'd grab the orange bin. And just because I can see it now. Oh, that sliver is going to drive me insane. Oh, I got it. Oh, it was a metal sliver. I don't know if it was from that root, ooh, or if it's a pin. Yikes. Yeah, it was a metal sliver. It's gone now, so not irritating. Let's put that straight in the garbage so nobody steps on it or gets it. I'm also I saw my purple bin when I opened. I wasn't anticipating that, but you never know. And then I have all these Scandi Village fabrics. I know there's lots of reds and pinks in here, so I'm gonna grab them as well. Oops. Another option could be a brighter orange. See, it looks like I'm pulling out tons of stuff, and I am, but you just never know. Sometimes you have the idea, but you've got to experiment a little bit and see what happens. So that's what we're going to do. Now, part of your determining factor, at least it will be for me, is how much of any of those colors do I have? If I don't have a lot of any of the colors, I may not want to use them, right? So I'm just going to move you a little bit closer again so we can see the design wall. Perfect. Okay, so my first instinct was red. Here's my red bin, which actually isn't very full at the moment because most of the stuff has been pulled out for the Scandi Village. So I'm going to go to that and grab a couple of the fabrics I know I have a fair amount of in red. Let's just grab this one too. So let's start just holding it up. Ooh, red. Red. Red is fun. Now, part of the determining factor will be, do I have enough of it? And is it going to really take away from what I have here? Is it going to be too much of a distraction, right? So maybe the color is right, but the print is too much, right? For example, I think that's the case with this one. Lovely koi dots. But because it's all red and white, it's not as strong of an idea there, right? I have that one. I really like the first two, but I'm worried that one of them is a bit too strong of a print, right? I really like this one. I think the color is quite nice. And I really like that dot in there. It's just a tiny little, almost like a Swiss dot type of thing. Not sure how much I would have. I might have to do some math to see if I had enough, because I have about half a meter here. And I'm going to guess, knowing my stash, that it's an older fabric. It just says Select Basics by Robin Pan. Couldn't tell you the manufacturer, nothing in there. Okay, so I like it. I don't have enough of it. Could I mix some fabrics for my sashing? Not a bad idea. This red, it's another little dot. It's a little bit different, but they're pretty close, right? They'll probably read the same. I have this one, not a dot, a little bit of a stripe, but it's a nice small print. So suddenly I can add things. It is a bit lighter, so maybe I don't want to have quite that much lightness. I don't know. We can play around. But the other thing I noticed is this fabric, and I think what I liked is that there's a little bit of an oranginess to it. It's more of an orangey red as opposed to a really cool red. So that's going to send me to my orange bin. Now I know my orange bin is decimated of big pieces at the moment, but let's see. There's another Carolyn Friedlander print. Ooh, the bright orange is actually quite nice in there. Right, we can fold things to get the idea of the bright orange in that, move it in different places. Ooh, I really like the bright orange. You know, I have this one here. It's a bit busier, so it may not be as effective. Right, I'm just going to fold it to give myself an idea. Actually, it works a bit, but it is a directional print, which means you're either going to have to decide to care about that or decide not to care about things. I have this great fabric that's an uppercase dot. Right? Nope, don't like it. It's not strong enough of a contrast. Right, so I can play around with all that. Now I thought about pink. Let's see what pink does. Pink's a neutral in my world, so there's pink, which actually looks kind of cool too. Maybe I can marry, I could do pinks and reds together. Do we have any other pinks? What about, you know, something like this, which has pink and orange in it, but it's a very busy fabric, so I don't know. No, definitely not. Here's another one that's sort of orange and pink. It's got a little bit of that green, right, that we've been using. No, again, too busy. So clearly for my sashing, I'm going to have to pick something with a smaller print. I am leaning towards, and I said I didn't want to go shopping, but sometimes when the right fabric shows up, you just kind of got to go for it. And I'm leaning towards that kind of an orange as my sashing. See, I totally thought I was going red, but now that I see the orange, it's probably going to show up pretty similar for you, the orange versus the red. But I really like the orange. What are your thoughts? Put it in the comments. What do you think? Orange or red in there? I'm leaning towards orange, but I'd be curious about your opinion on all of that. Yeah. Okay, I know where I can get more of this. I'm sure they still have it at the quilt store. Yeah, lots of votes coming in for orange in the chat, right? We have our first instincts, and then sometimes you got to play around and experiment because things change. That's another reason why, total aside, I don't like to make quilts where I pre-cut all of the pieces. I've only done it a couple of times in 24 years of quilting. Yeah, everything's coming up orange for the votes. Connie, I like it. Connie says white because it's too different for this conservative one for her. Fair enough, right? You got to make a quilt that you love at the end of the day. But yeah, I've only made a couple of quilts where I cut it all at the beginning. That's not my usual style, obviously. But yeah, what if you change your mind and then you've cut all of that fabric? What if I had started off saying, oh, I'm going to sash this in red or I'm going to sash this in white, and I got to this point and I hated it, right? And then I would feel guilty because I had cut all that fabric already. I don't want to do that in there at all. Yeah, overwhelming votes for orange with the 1 vote for white. So white would be great too. It would just be a very different quilt. That's all. Nothing right or wrong with either choice. But I'm definitely now going orange. See, sometimes you got to play with it and put it up on the design wall to see where things are at. So that is everything the same size, squared up. Other options, like we said, is you can assemble this in columns. So maybe you have some blocks that are taller, but they're that width. Right. And so we only worry about the columns. And I know a couple people had done this, that they worried about columns or you worried about rows. play around with the colors, with the values, right? This relative light versus dark in there, and or maybe you have it all in rows, all in columns, but just play with it. But take the time to, you can put them up on the design wall first and see what they want to tell you to be, or you can go ahead and just straight square things up. But measure a lot or most of the blocks first before you determine the size with it. So I think with this, I am going to do that orange, and like I'm looking at this, and that's about, you know, 2-inch gap in between. I might actually go with a full 2-inch, maybe 1.5 inches, like cut 2-inch strips and have 1.5 inches in between, because I don't want it to be an orange grid with a bunch of kind of random blocks. I need them to have a relationship to each other. So if you go real wide in your sashing, then that can change things as well. One other thing before I move on from this, because it relates to sashing, I'm just going to get all this extra fabric out of the way. You may, let's say you have, I'm going to go back to that heart block because we remember that this one is smaller. Maybe you only have one block, 1 or 2 blocks that are that outliers. You could sash this in a contrasting color and make that a focal point of the quilt, right? And have this be kind of a different feature. The other thing you can do with sashing, although it is a bit, it uses a lot more fabric, and you will end up with a lot more scraps, and hopefully usable scraps, but maybe not. You could sash each block, right? Add 4 sides to each block and then square them up to a consistent size. If your blocks are kind of all over the place, that's one way to manage it. But that squaring up to get to them all to the same size will give you a lot of trimmings. If you don't mind, great. If that's going to bother you, because that's a lot of trimmings, don't do it that way. Square up and then add sashing in between the blocks when you're laying it out. Does that make sense? Good question there. Okay. Allison got out. She said, your connection is back. Who knew opening a door would help? You know what? I have my door open so that the light can come in from there. It's random little things. Doors are good. Open doors and don't close them until you're truly ready to close them. Okay, so that's it for my print version. I want to talk about my solid version because that is going to be a completely different way of putting the blocks together. So let's take these off the design wall. Got those ones already squared up, so let's keep them in a separate pile and not make more work for myself, right? And I will move the rest of the print ones. And we're going to stay here on the design wall because there are some fun things about to happen. So I think it could all change like it just did. You never know, right? But I had kind of anticipated all along with my print ones that they were going to go together in a bit of a different way. So I haven't squared any of them up, and I'm not going to at this point, because what I want to do is get them up on the design wall, and they're going to tell me where they want to go. And well, relatively speaking, they're going to tell me where they want to go and how big they want to be, and if I need any kind of fillers along the way. So I'm going to grab a drink of water. All right, all this talking. So I'm going to grab, I don't know, something that I want to be the center. I'll go with this one. Right. I'm not picking anything per se. I'm just out of preference, more just, I liked that I had the blue and then I have some of the gray and the white. This is where I'm going to have fun now, playing with shape, playing with my fabrics, because I have a very small sample of colors, 3. I can start doing some really interesting things where I have the colors and the blocks relate to each other. Right? So I like that I can create this sort of different shape along there. I'm going to add, I've got a blue, my original block, right? In there. Let's go into something that has, let's take this X because I have that little bit of gray there. And I'm going to have that relationship come up along the way. Let's go for some whites, right? I have this white block. I've got the white connecting there, and I like this kind of curve with these angles along the way there. I have my heart, and maybe I want my heart to, stand out. Now you'll notice that I kind of have all these I got all these uncut edges. You can go ahead and trim that a little bit beforehand, but then I find that I'm cutting twice. So I might just fold an edge there. It's not going to look exactly how it does here when we do sort of some other things, but that's okay. So I want to I don't want to have you could go just from colors, like I could have all white moving up towards the gray. I can play around with things. I'm going to do like that because I like that movement of the gray over there. And then I'm going to add another block that has a bit more gray on it, like a spider web, but maybe I'm just going to kind of go part way down so that I can add, something like this above and have that connection there going, right? I want to see how these are going to interact a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to start kind of playing with where these could go along the way, right? I like the idea of extending that line there, right? But I just have my let's go here. No, because see, I don't like that interaction of those two designs together. So I'm just going to hold off. I'm just going to play. I'm just going to play, see what happens, right? Those blocks, well, I like the colors. I don't like how that interacts, but I like this because this could be a good transition, right? From the blue flowing here, the white coming out here, and now I can bring gray in down here a little bit if I want, right? So I can be playing around with those sorts of different things along the way. Here's another good one that could transition, right? Because I have the blue connecting there, the white connecting there. Maybe I've got this kind of crazy one. Maybe that comes up here, right? So I can just play around until I get to a point where I'm happy. I'm just going to throw a bunch up, see what happens, and then we'll talk about next steps. Okay. Just get a few up there to show. Right, I like that sort of extension of that design kind of coming down there a little bit. Now my Golden Gate's really going to stand out, right? It's like I've made it bigger there. Then I have more of that gray with the hearth blocks, so I could even do that. Or maybe, you know, I change the angle so that it's not exactly the same. That sort of thing. Play around with where things go. Okay. Let's get another one up there. Okay, so I have a whole bunch up there, right? This is, in all honesty, my absolute favorite thing to do. It might not be yours, fair enough. But don't be afraid, try it. Just play with it and see what happens. I would spend the time, probably in my case, an hour or two, kind of getting it in a way that feels good for me, so that I have those interactions, right? Jan said she likes the interactions from the block. I do too. And that was kind of my intent by really being controlled in the color story here. You may have a print that runs through all of the blocks that you can do the same sort of thing with too. My blocks are not all the same size. You can do it like we showed where they would be the same size, but mine are not the same size. That doesn't mean this is going to be a super painful process. It does mean it's going to be a slower process. I'm just going to say that. So accept it and embrace it, right? But I enjoy that in there. So let's say this is where I'm going. What is a little bit hard to see on here, because I've used white, is that I have gaps in along the way in different places. That's fine because I have the fabric and I have scraps and I'll have trimmings that I can fill in those gaps with. And I have, right, my basket of scraps. I can go from there, and there will come a point where I am squaring up these blocks and I'm going to get trimmings from them, and I can use them along the way. Ellen says this is exactly what I've been doing while listening to you. So many possibilities. Oh, thanks. I think that's great. A lot of people saying this is also their favorite way of doing things too. So once I'm at a layout that I like, remember, I haven't squared any of these up. Then what I'm going to do is I like to take, there's kind of two approaches to this, and I do both, in all honesty. You can take a ruler and let's say, like, I'll start looking and going, okay, well, these are going to come together like a 4-patch, right? These 4 blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I'll just do a quick measurement. What size does it want to be on the block? Do a quick square up of the blocks, assemble it as a 4-patch, put it back on the wall. The point is that somewhere you have to start. I prefer to start in the middle and work my way out. Some people start at the top and go down, or a corner and come out. I don't like the corner out method personally, because sometimes then you're left with gaps that are much bigger than you want. You can make them work. You can make another block, fillers, whatever. But I tend to work kind of from the center out or in components, right? So maybe I'm going to put all these together and then I'll have all this together. And then there's a bottom strip that comes together. The blocks will tell you what they want, right? Sometimes they're going to be exactly the same size and you just sew those together. Other times you're going to fill. I will, true confession, avoid an inset / Y seam as much as possible, but sometimes they're not avoidable. They're not a big deal in there at all. But if I can figure out a layout, put a filler strip in so that I don't have to do that, I will. But I always end up with a few and it's not a big deal in there. Don't let them scare you along the way. Like, it's kind of hard to see, but if in this little bit there's a gap here, right, that gap could be quite fun with a totally, here's a piece section that I could throw in right there, or a totally different, there's another little, right, using in my scraps, adding that in, right? So we can use what we have to kind of fill it in and get what we want along the way. So I'll kind of do it. If this is overwhelming, and that you have, it's too much to have it, start a little bit, but you want to try and you want to explore. Here's a couple of tips to make that a little bit more bearable, manageable for you. Identify blocks that you really like side by side, or together, and then sew them together first before you get to this. So for example, these two work really nicely together. They're roughly the same width. So I could go ahead and square those up and sew them together. So I have one component already done, right? And so then I'm working with bigger pieces. Now that can be one way to manage the overwhelm of trying to figure out how to do this, but it also has limitations because suddenly then you've already made that decision. You've closed the door on that. Doesn't mean you can't cut or rip the seam and get it out, but it's totally feasible within all of that. So that is how I'm going to do this one. Now that I look at it, I'm leaning towards actually having the center be where most of the white is, and then going out from that. So using the white as a bit of a focal point. I think initially I thought I was going to do the opposite, have the white be around the edges, but I'm not sure. So let's play around with it. We have a little bit of time left. Just want to show you how my brain works on getting this kind of stuff done. So I had initially started with, let's do this. So here's the other tip. We all have iPads or phones in there. Sorry, I just realized I hadn't muted my phone, but thankfully it didn't have a problem. Take a picture of where you're at, right? Give yourself a point of reference so that you can, okay, that's what that one looked like. Now I'm going to make a change. Let's see what happened the next time. So the change I'm going to make is I'm actually going to go more blue in the center. So as I pull these off the wall, I'm kind of organizing them a little bit and saying, okay, I've got more of darks. Maybe I do stuff like that. Right, this is a great transition to white piece, right? So I could have that over here as it's transitioning to the white, and then maybe, we do some things like that. That one's a little bit darker. That's another kind of good transition piece. So maybe it comes over here, and we still get some kind of cool interactions, but we're, mostly dark along the way. But, we have this, and maybe that helps us transition to gray along the way. There's another one, right, where we did half and half. So, we can have some transitioning here. And then we have a piece like this, right, where I've got white here, and I can maybe do that. Actually, let's do that. Right, so I'm kind of moving that. So I have this darker area and I'm moving towards white. Here's a couple, and I've kind of created, without even trying, this diagonal kind of from here, even coming through this, because there's diagonals in that along the way. So there's kind of some interesting things that you can do in there. And then maybe now that I have all this white, I go, okay, let's put one in that's really going to pop in that white, right? And I have her standing there being, strong and proud in there, right? Likewise, I have ones like this that I can then say maybe put up here, and they really stand out in there. So there's lots of different ways to kind of explore. I like the idea of using this arrow, right? Pointing to the white. Oh, you can't see it. The arrow pointing to the white section, right? I can play around with different ideas there, you know, and then maybe do some more up here where I'm transitioning to gray, or I have a few that, you know, have different sorts of features that are going to interact with each other. Actually, don't like that arrow there. Right, and then sometimes we just play around, see what happens along the way. Right, just to show you a couple of different ideas hanging out. Right, I really quite like actually the way that sort of line has come along the way there. Don't mind me, I just dropped the tripod. It's not an adventure sew-along session if I don't drop something, right? If I don't wobble something, drop something along the way. So I will play with this layout, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'll use the term trim the blocks as I go, as opposed to beforehand, but you could certainly do it beforehand, right? Like if you have a block, you know, like this, what I would do is if you want to trim it beforehand so that you don't have all the little extra bits when you're futzing around on the design wall, go ahead and trim that to the biggest it can be, right? So you're giving yourself nice straight edges, but you're not squaring it up to a specific size. So that for me is the difference between trimming and squaring up. Squaring up is going to a specific size, may or may not be a square, but you're squaring it up to a specific size. Trimming is giving yourself, you know, right angle corners and straight edges, and then working with that. It may be easier on the design wall if you have already done that, right? This block's not too bad, but you may have, you know, really wonky ones, you know, like the spider web, you know, with all these extra bits. And then, you know, what if you line it up down here, but then you're going to end up cutting there. So you've got kind of things to do there with that. And then you're kind of working with what it is. Other options when it comes to joining these, we talked about using scraps and trimming as filler bits elsewhere. You also don't have to join the blocks along straight lines, right? We have used layered curves and layered angles all throughout the adventure sew along, and you could do the same thing when you're joining blocks together. You could join them on an angle. You could slice a block in half and say, this one isn't working, I only need half of it. Cut it off, right? But use that layered technique. And maybe your blocks have curves along the way. Maybe you skip squaring up entirely and just join your blocks with waves along the way, right? You could totally just skip squaring up and do that, right? Make a whole row and then join 2 rows together the exact same way, layering them, and then cutting. Rows are a little bit harder to do that way, but possible, totally possible. But you could maybe do 4 patches and then join 4 patches, and it's just a little bit more manageable. If you want to do a whole row, the cutting is the hard part. Sewing is easy. The cutting is the hard part because you need to have it all flat and layered. And I could show you that, but it would be, I don't think I'm set up for it in the room here right now. But don't hesitate to use some of those techniques to join your blocks together, or to edge things, right? We talked about sashing. Other ways to sash are with that wave, right? So instead of having straight sashing, you could use a little wave. Along the way, you could put corners on each block, right? Each block could have its own little corner. And then you would have that secondary design where the corners meet, right? Little snowballs or curves, right? If you did little quarter circle on each corner, then when you put the blocks together, you're going to get that secondary little design. Other ideas that you could do, shout them out if you've got more in there. But there's a whole bunch of different kind of options that you can do. I do want to share, hold on a second. Yeah, I still have it open. I'm going to share my screen for a second because I went to the hashtag and there are a couple of people who have already laid out their quilts and I wanted you to see them if you haven't had a chance to go to the hashtag here. So this is at Quilt Along Together. If you're on here, let me know. Oh, okay. I see it. That is, who's that? Your name's not popping up for me.
It's Terry. I have 2 Instagram handles, one private and one public, but my public one is Quilt Along Together. Perfect.
So Terry, do you mind talking for a little bit to explain how you chose your layout?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an accountant, so I need things to be in grids and I need some order to things. And I put up everything at first in all sorts of random order and I just couldn't, it didn't look right to me. And so there is order here. All my blocks are, I think they were 9 inches by 9 inches. So I cut them down quite a bit because I had some huge ones. And then I started, they are in rows and columns of color, the predominant color. So some of the blocks didn't have a lot of pink in it, say, but it still ended up in the pink row. And so you can see that, like the green column, you can see that one quite clearly. And then some of the columns just were every color that I used. And then there's a silver row or a gray row as well. And so I needed to create some sort of order in the improv. And so I'm happy with how it's come out. I had a couple blocks left over. I had some huge blocks. And I'm actually going to quilt them and make a tote bag.
Because
I thought the backing on this one is going to be a thrifted curtain that I got, a cotton curtain that I got. And so I don't need to piece the backing. So I thought, well, I want to use them because one of them I really like is that, which I would love to do a whole quilt of this, is this one.
Hold on, I'm going to share or make you the spotlight. There you go. Oh yeah.
I mean, they're not my colors. I'm not a yellow person generally. I'm not sure why I picked yellow to put in this quilt, but I love the shapes of this because I'm very much into the modern vibe. And so I would love to do a whole quilt of these guys.
Yeah, I've thought the same thing. I think it could be, you could really do some neat interactions between color as you moved across a quilt with that. Yeah.
Super fun. Thank you very much, Cheryl. I enjoyed the year so much. And I loved having a Tuesday thing to look forward to. Because I'm retired, so I don't have, I mean, I have things to do, but not as much as working people do. And so it was very much a thing I looked forward to every Tuesday to see what you were going to come up with. And I fell behind sometimes, but that was okay because you taped them and I could go back and I could do them. And it was very cool also to see what other people were doing because they were taking what you were showing us and then they were interpreting it in color ways or in other shapes. And so quite often I wanted to wait to do my block until after a few people had done it to see what everybody was doing and then get creative from there.
Yeah, I know that exact feeling. That's almost why I started the third version, because I got so excited by seeing what everybody else did that it gave me the opportunity to play a little bit. All right. Thanks so much, Terry. I'm going to share a couple more that were posted on the Instagrams. So let's go back. Here's one. At Hesbez13, they're New Zealand. So there, I imagine you're not on here. Unmute yourself if you are in there. But this is a very controlled color story, straight grid done. So she's gone 6 by 7 in here. So not all of the blocks, but most of the blocks. No sashing, but you can still really see, oh, see, there's a great one with the heart. You see the heart is taking up a little bit more. And then right below that, she's combined a small, they've combined, I don't know if it's a he or she, they've combined a small one with the words play in there, which is really quite fun. I love that. You can see examples where maybe they've had to add some pieces to make the block a little bit bigger to fit in with all of this. But yeah, it really, really works well. Arita, who is not on here, but I know she had already done this. She had kind of a color story going with her blocks. And so she's made smaller quilts from them in there. And so she's, you know, this is one color story with just some of the blocks in here. This one, because of the really predominant white with that circle background, has a very minimalist kind of feel to it. Works really effectively there. There was one more. Here's some good ones. And I think you're on here playing with layouts here, just kind of, you know, structuring around color in there. And I think it looks really successful in there. So you, again, you don't have to use all 52 blocks. You can use just a portion, maybe only made a few, right? And that's fine, but there's a lot of different possibilities in there as well. And then I'm going to put you on the spot, but Mindy, I see yours on the design wall behind you. Would you be willing to chat with us a little bit about what you've got going on there?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I want to start by saying thank you so much. I'm actually the opposite of the other person that spoke. I work ridiculous hours all the time, and having the Playcation scheduled in as if it was a meeting was absolutely wonderful for me this year. So I decided to use only scraps in solids. So each day I picked a different color and a gray to go with it. And ultimately what I want to do is put it together so that it looks like a color wheel. So this is me also trying to be a little bit thoughtful about colors and learning about colors. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I think I only have 38 blocks done out of the 52. I am not going to go back and make up the ones that I missed because I kind of like the idea of this being my 2022 project, and it is what it is. So I think it was really helpful today, Cheryl, seeing you talk about your different layouts. So I think I'm going to do the come what may approach. And I kind of have an idea already of how I would like them to go together. And I think now I will go through, because I don't have so many blocks, and add to each one, either a little bit more solid or pick one of the grays and until they line up in some way.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks. Does anyone else want to share what they've got going on at this point? No? Okay. So I just want to make two final comments at the end here. One is finishing up your quilts. And because Terry actually brought it up, when it comes to quilting these and okay, first of all, I don't care if you don't finish. So you have my permission, no matter what anybody in your life says. If these blocks just stay these blocks forever, great. You had fun still. And that was the point. But if you get to the point of a quilt top and you want to turn this into a quilt, my big recommendation is that your backing be as minimally pieced as possible. So whether you're using, like Terry said, a thrifted sheet or a wide back, or depending on your quilt size, just maybe 1 or 2 seams on the back, that is going to save you a lot of headaches when it comes to quilting, because we have a lot of blocks with small pieces in them and more seam allowances, and our seam allowances aren't in predictable places, right? No matter what layout you've chosen, your seam allowances aren't in predictable places. So when you go to quilt it, if you are free motion quilting it especially, but it can happen with straight line quilting too. If you have a bumpy back and a bumpy front, your machine is going to skip stitches, or it is more inclined to skip stitches, which is going to cause you headaches while you are quilting it. Long arms, less so, definitely. But on a home machine, it can happen a lot. So if you've ever been quilting and you're like, why does it keep, skipping stitches? It's probably because you have the interaction of the top and the back and the bumps and everything, and your machine's just not handling it very well. I have a Bernina and it does this if I'm not careful. So minimal seams on the back of this quilt would be a recommendation. And then the second last note, I didn't actually talk about my third quilt, but since we're talking about quilting, that's what I'm going to do. You know what I'm doing with my all solid ones? First of all, let me grab them here. They're just on the other side of the computer. So I have, these just, I'm working with scraps and whatever I kind of have in solids. They're all different colors and everything. You know what I'm doing with these? I'm going to do quilt as you go, because I am now very comfortable with the technique. I have another Instagram live on it, or I highly recommend the tutorials on Marianne Hack. What is her, I've suddenly blanked on her Instagram handle. If someone remembers it, put it in the chat. But it's Marianne Hack with 2 A's, H-A-A, Quilter's Edge. Thank you, at Quilter's Edge. And that is the name of her blog. She has great tutorials on quilt as you go. But I have tons of scrap batting that I should use. And so I'll have all of these blocks with it. And then I think the joining will be a sashing. And I will I haven't decided, because I wore stripes today because somebody mentioned that they were quite used to seeing me in stripes in the videos. And I looked back and I was like, wow, I did wear all of my striped shirts a lot on the videos. So I might do a striped sashing just in homage to that, or I'll just take what I have left of my solids and it'll be different, right? I think this is just because the colors are kind of all over the place. It's just going to be really kind of random in all of that. But quilt as you go is another great way to play with these and use all of your sashing, or use your batting scraps in there. So that is a third option with that. So yes, that's Marianne Hack at the Quilter's Edge, or online, or on Instagram at Quilter's Edge in there. So if you want to do the quilt as you go sort of idea there. I just want to say thank you so much for showing up with this. Mari Quilts, thank you. I knew I was forgetting it. So at Mari Quilts, M-A-R-I Quilts. You're right, that is where it is. The Quilter's Edge is the website, at Mari Quilts is her Instagram. I'm going to blame the perimenopause brain for that. So I just want to say thank you for showing up and participating in all of this. It's been so fun for me. I see your hand up, Terry. I will come to you in a second. I just want to give you a heads up. I am planning a different version for 2023. It will start in February. It won't be weekly. I know a lot of you like weekly. I just can't do it every week, but I will be doing it at least monthly, maybe twice a month. I haven't quite figured that out yet. Where we do one live and then maybe one session like this on there. I did have a couple of requests about not being on Instagram for it. So I may be doing YouTube live streams that then stay on YouTube afterwards. So still free, still hanging out with everybody, but it's very much improv and play based, but with a little bit of a theme going on and a little bit different. I'm hoping it'll be really fun. I'm kind of excited by it. So when I know that when I'm getting geeky and nerdy about it, that it'll probably be pretty good. And hopefully I can translate that well for you. Ann Ayler said, maybe we could have a group show at the Heritage Park Quilt Show for those local. That is a great idea. That's actually one of the other things I wanted to mention. I'm looking at an opportunity where we could have these displayed together if people want, meaning if you finish and you want to go to that point. So that is certainly on the agenda. Heritage Park is one of them, looking at a couple of other options. Don't feel pressure at all, just saying that that's a potential opportunity in there. So yes, it is there. Okay, so we're just about at noon here in Calgary. I want to leave it open for any questions or comments as we finish up. I know Terry had her hand up, and we'll go there. That's enough blabber for me.
I just wondered, Cheryl, I'm to the point where I'm thinking about how I'm going to quilt this. And so yes. Recognizing that the blocks are quite complex, I'm not sure I want to go in and do a lot of kind of free motion quilting on it, because it just feels like it might be too busy. So I was just thinking of doing kind of grid lines, maybe lines horizontally and vertically.
Yep.
But I wondered if you had any other ideas. You talked a little bit about the quilt as you go. I thought about that, and then I just pieced the whole thing and thought
you're already assembled, so you're too far for that. This is a great question. So the vast majority of these quilts are going to be busy, really, from a design point of view. So you kind of have two choices. You can do very detailed outlining, echo, that kind of stuff. Or you can just ignore all of that and do an all over design. So I'm going to say for the vast majority of us, it's going to be the latter. I love the idea of a grid. I've done quite a few quilts in grids, and I love when grids are uneven.
Yeah.
Right. And for your particular quilt, just because I was thinking of it with a quilt that I was snuggling under last night, actually, changing the thread color as well, because you have the multiple colors in yours. So maybe you do a whole pass of lines in the pink, and then a whole pass of lines in the green, and same horizontally, and just change your thread. It doesn't mean you change it like as you go, like, because that's just a lot of work, but do a whole bunch of lines in one color, then change your thread, or go all the way through a bobbin and then change it. That sort of thing. Again, that will help you manage the quilting a little bit, and it will look interesting. Or any all over, right? Just loops, stipples, stars.
Big ones.
Yeah,
big
a Baptist
ones,
fan type of idea would look good, because we have a lot of curves in it. Diagonal lines. You're not going to be taking away from it. Also, on the note of quilting, and it really applies to your particular quilt, but it actually will apply to everybody's. When it comes to thread color, two great choices are going to be olive green and a dusty rose. Those are fantastic neutrals for multicolored quilts. I use them on quilts that may not even have green or pink in them, or have very little, but they work as wonderful neutrals in quilts.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we wrap up? All right, well, I'm going to let you go just after 12. You guys know where to find me. online in there. So that's at Cheryl_Arkison on Instagram. You can find me at CherylArkison.com. You can find the Quilters Playcation at quiltersplaycation.com. Sign up for the newsletter in both places. I will be announcing the 2023 one probably next week. I took time off over Christmas, so this week's a bit getting back into it. And so I will be announcing what the next adventure will be. And I have some really fun ideas for that. And I'm excited you're here, and stay tuned for more events as we go. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. That was fabulous.